Okay, I think I have about a 50-50 shot this week here. Either Emily or Dan. Dan or Emily. Okay, here I go. Emily, what are we talking about this week?
You got it. Important questions to ask a partner before making a commitment, stay at home spouses, and experiences versus things.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it.
So, big life changes, whether it's moving in with a partner, getting married, whatever that means for you, there's definitely some conversations that need to be had before you make that commitment. What are some things you think people should talk about?
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm not getting married right now. I think it's important to put that out there. Olivia, if you're listening, I hope you're doing well. I'll speak with you later. However, it's a big thing that comes up with a lot of our clients. One of the most important decisions they'll make in their life, and more often than not, a lot of people struggle with the communication aspect before they pop the question and decide to get married, engaged, move in together. All these different things. I think first and foremost, you have to be willing to have the hard conversation with your spouse. And frankly, if you're in a position where you're going to get engaged or get married, you're probably used to having difficult and uncomfortable conversations. First and foremost, right off the bat, how are you going to split the finances up? I think is a really important aspect of a marriage. We have clients that segregate everything completely, and the other spouse has no idea how much the other spouse saves, earns, etc. We have clients that do a mix where they share some things and not all things. And then we have other clients that share everything with each other. First and foremost, I think that's a super important thing that needs to be discussed. And it's a very tricky conversation to have, especially when there's varying preferences on how to handle some of these situations. I think another thing we could probably spend a couple minutes on is children. A lot of people get married with the intention of having children. And that's a loaded question in and of itself, Emily. We have clients that don't even know how many children they want to have, and that creates a whole multitude of complexities as well. What are some things that you come to mind for you when you think of questions to ask in regards to having children in a marriage?
I mean, parenting techniques and stuff aside, I think a lot of people will have the conversation about, for example, I hate to use the word, but spoiling the child, but they don't really dig deeper and get to, what is your definition of spoiling the child versus what is mine? They might say, oh yeah, I agree. We shouldn't give them too much. And they think, okay, great. We're on the same page. But then, time goes by and something comes up, and one parent says, of course we should cover this for them and make their life easier. We wouldn't want them to struggle unnecessarily, which is a valid viewpoint. But then the other party maybe says, okay, well, that's something they should have to earn for themselves, or it's an important lesson for them to learn, which is also a valid point. And, that point you've already had the child and the decision needs to be made, and you guys are both have kind of picked a hill you want to die on. And I think a lot of people then come to the point where they're like, I wish we'd talked about this sooner and decided on the more specifics of whatever decision it is, like, college savings, for example. People will say, oh, yeah, we should, open a 529 and save for our kids' college. We're on the same page. Great. That is an important conversation. But, are you paying for full tuition? Are you paying room and board? Is it community college or Harvard? Either way, we're paying 100%. Like, are we also giving them, money for a living, or do we expect them to have a part-time job through school? There's so many variables to actually dig down and talk about. And I think people don't want to because they think, well, we haven't even had the kid yet. Why would we discuss something like that? But it is really important.
There's a lot of really good tidbits in there, Emily. I think the first thing you said is just this idea of spoiling or, overindulging, pampering, whatever word you want to use for the conversation. Nobody really comes to us or says, "Hey, I want to spoil the heck out of my children. I want them to be, more privileged than they'd ever deserve and you not recognize that privilege and whatnot." Nobody wants that for their children. They want their children to, grow up to be wise adults, that make good decisions and help people out and whatnot. Some version of that, I assume. But, indulging or pampering or spoiling is different for a lot of families. You know, for some folks, it's I bought my son a car, and for other people, it's well, I paid for my daughter's first home or her wedding and vacation every year. And for some folks, it's just making sure that child is alive for their 18th birthday. And if they've done that, they've done considerably more than they feel they were responsible for. And it's such a varying spectrum for a lot of folks. And I think getting a good idea of what that looks like for you as a family is going to be really important. The other aspect of that you brought up that's really important is the college savings. Because, yeah, not only can the difference between Harvard and in-state two-year community college make such a considerable difference, but it also makes a really good point, or it begs the question of how you want to pay for some of these things. I think a lot of folks that come to us say, we want to save for a college education, and think, they have to save that through cash flow, meaning the money they currently have, and invest that for the duration of the time until the child goes to college. However, I don't think people have enough conversations about how they want to fund that as well. This could be funded in a couple of different ways. It could be funded, one, through current cash flow, like we mentioned. Two, could take on a loan for that child on their behalf and pay it off for them. Or third, you can use existing savings you've already built up to fund a college education. And I think the mode in which you decide to do that is also very important. However, that's definitely putting the cart before the horse, as in this instance, those people haven't even had children yet. I think that the third aspect of this we should probably discuss, Emily, is the flip side of having children, and it's having parents. A lot of families we work with have parents they need to take care of. And that's a difficult decision as well, because you have to ask yourself and your spouse, okay, what happens if, God forbid, one of our parents has, negative health consequences one day, and we have to take care of them? Do we want to take care of them? Can we financially take care of them? Maybe so, maybe not. Where are they going to live? Are they going to live with us? Are we going to pay for them to live somewhere else? And I think getting on the same page with your spouse prior to getting married about how you would want to approach such a difficult conversation like that is also really important, because nobody wants to have that conversation if and when they're in distress, because you're going to have a very emotionally charged conversation where you're likely not getting as much use out of it as you probably could have if you were more proactive, I think.
Yeah, I think planning for parents would probably be more difficult for people than children, because at least when it's children involved, you're often as equally invested in it, I guess. But for parents, it's always my parents and your parents, and people have different ideas of, I'm never ever going to put my own mother in like a facility or anything. Like if she needs care, she's moving in with us, and I want to make sure she's taken good care of. And that's wonderful, but your spouse or partner may not agree. It's not their mother. So, I see a lot of that with clients. It's a conversation to be had where they're just not quite on the same page. And it's a really, really big decision. Or, they agree, well, yes, let's financially help out your dad. What does that mean? Are you paying for in-home care for your dad? Or is he moving in? Or something like that is, again, getting into the specifics ahead of time is so important for couples with kids and parents.
Another good thing, you could definitely discuss is retirement or just work timelines. For some families that are very fortunate, both spouses don't always have to work, and having a conversation on, hey, my time might be more valuable staying at home with these potential children we're thinking about having, versus, having an extra X dollars of income per year, which I think is a perfect segue to the second thing you said you wanted to discuss here, Emily, which is the value of a stay-at-home spouse, which I think is considerably understated in our society, and especially in the context of financial planning. So what do you want to talk about here?
Well, I think first of all, you kind of touched it on already, but being a stay-at-home partner, parent, whatever it may be, is a really important job, and a lot of work goes into it, and it provides a lot of value to the family. If one person has decided to stay home, that often means taking on 100% of the child care if you have children, cleaning, cooking, lawn care, all the errands and appointments and things like that always kind of fall to that role, which of course you can each negotiate whatever stay-at-home spouse means to you guys as a household, but that's the most common version of it we see, where one person works and makes all the money and one person is at home managing all of the household things. And both are very important, but I see a lot of our clients that are stay at home, they don't get to clock out. They're kind of always on duty, doing a lot, supporting that spouse that is then going to work and, being the breadwinner financially. think it's really important to talk to each other if you're even considering one of you being a stay-at-home. What does that entail for you, and what kind of support are you each going to provide for each other?
One of the really, I think, overlooked aspects of a stay-at-home spouse is insurability, or insuring the stay-at-home spouse, which I think also helps emphasize the importance and the roles of responsibilities that they tackle for the family. Think of things, let's play out a scenario for a second where spouse A works and spouse B stays at home, and spouse A makes all the money for the family. If spouse A is to pass, or sorry, I think I got this backwards here. If spouse B, the home giver, were to pass, now the person making all the money has to hire a nanny, find somebody to cook, find somebody to clean the house, drive the kids to school, pick the kids up from school, and as well as a multitude of other things that me as a non-parent probably is not thinking of. But those things all cost money, and I don't think people realize that the insurability, or the importance of insuring the stay-at-home spouse, really is for a family, because for a lot of families these things actually do cost money, and people don't think about it like that because that person isn't directly earning in a sense. However, the things they do are associated to a considerable sum of money, and I think that really shows how important that stay-at-home spouse is, and probably something a lot of folks can look into more, and how that fits into their family lifestyle.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of the things are hard to put a number to when you're thinking about a stay-at-home spouse. But when you say you were both, busy working professionals and neither of you stayed home, you end up paying a lot of time for the convenience factor on things, and things are more expensive overall. And if you have a stay-at-home partner doing some things, a lot of families are able to cut costs that way because you have more time to do things that you would otherwise outsource or pay more to have delivered or made for you, or whatever that may be. A lot of people that have a stay-at-home partner have more availability to tweak their budget and really cut back if they find out they need to for some reason.
I have a picture of our boss Dan in my head saying that sometimes a decision is the best life decision. However, it might not be the best financial decision for you, and it's a way to push clients to do the things they want to do, even if it's not potentially the most financially optimal choice. And I think this is a great example of that. For some families, yeah, they might have less money coming in from cash flow. However, the time that they get back from having a spouse stay at home and do all those tasks, as opposed to somebody else doing it, if both spouses were working, is a really big life decision for a lot of families, and a really important one that, like we said, it should be heavily considered. And I think that's a great point you bring up there.
Sure. And a lot of people, I think they view it as, and it is, a really big decision to make, but it always doesn't have to be such a long-term one as well. We've had a conversation with someone before, and they said, we actually both want to stay home with our child until they're about 5, and then we're going to put them in school. They'll go to public school, and we'll both go back to work. And, they were kind of trying to tweak their plan and make sure they could do something like that. And I think there's a lot of unconventional options like that nowadays for people if they're willing to do it. I mean, that obviously set them back financially in several ways for savings and retirement and cash flow and everything. But to them, the value of both of them being home with that child during their most formative years it had an unlimited amount of value to them. They're willing to give up who knows how many dollars to be able to be there for that child. So, it should be a conversation around, yes, the finances of it, but also what is important to you, what is so valuable to you, and what are like your household values, I guess. Where are you guys at on that?
That's great. There's a lot of really good information in there, Emily. So the third thing you said you wanted to talk about here today was the value of experiences versus the value of things. And when you said that earlier, it reminded me of a cautionary tale here. Have you ever heard of a gentleman, or the Dennis Diderot, or the Diderot effect?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, well, allow me to tell a story for a brief second here. I believe, and I might butcher some of the nitty-gritty details here. However, I believe there was a gentleman named Dennis Diderot who was, I guess we'd consider him today, a public figure, artist, writer, speaker, philosopher. So, jack of all trades, I guess, is what I'm trying to allude to. Prominent during the Age of Enlightenment in France, so 17th and 18th century. And it originally, this gentleman, Dennis Diderot, had money and was able to buy things. And this effect was first described in an essay titled "Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown," in which Dennis Diderot, this gentleman, buys a beautiful scarlet gown, and it leads him to look at the rest of his house and say, "Oh, well, that chair is not nearly as nice as this gown. Let me get a new chair." And then buys a new chair and says, "Well, the table doesn't match the chair anymore, so now I need to buy a new table." And now he looks at the table and the chair and the dress and says, "Well, the drapes don't match, so now I need to upgrade the drapes." And long story short, it's this tendency to buy more things after acquiring a new possession, which essentially leads to a cycle of overconsumption. And Dennis Diderot and the Diderot effect is essentially just that. It's this unchecked pursuit of more materials, and kind of depicts how people can fall into a trap of materialism by having this unchecked pursuit of wanting more things. And I think it's a really great story that kind of explains this experiences versus things concept that you brought up. I think we see this a lot via social media or simply with clients. It's people pushing folks to purchase more things that'll provide them an experience over a material thing. So what do you want to talk about in regards to this? I think it's a really important topic for us.
I agree. It's actually the one I'm most excited about because we talk to clients a lot about this. This is a big part of our roles, is just coaching people and getting conversations started. It's really not just watching the stock market every day like people seem to think we do. Because the hardest thing for people to do is realize that they maybe aren't on the same page about things, or how easy it could be to come to a general consensus. Talking about spending your money and time and energy on experiences versus material possessions. People feel defensive if they pick one or the other that they feel their partner may not agree with, and therefore they're going to be judged for it, which in most cases their partners are not judgmental about it. If anything, they're curious about it. And they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize you wanted to own this thing, or you wanted to go here on a trip. It was so important to you." And they end up learning a lot about each other and really getting into it. And at the end of it all, I would like to say, a little bit closer. It certainly seems like it from our vantage point, but it is hard to start that conversation and then to also know yourself well enough to be able to answer accurately. I think a lot of people feel cautious about saying, "Well, I want things. I want stuff. I want a new jacket." And we've talked a little bit in previous episodes about money scripts and things like that, and why people want the things they want. And I think that's an important part of the conversation for people to have too, is what do you want and why?
Really good point. And I like to say it all the time. Personally, I think that memories appreciate over time, meaning something I did 5 years ago, I think much more fondly today than I did then, when I was, hot on the beach complaining, whatever. But all I remember today is how nice the sun was that one day, and the waves crashing over the beach and whatnot. So the memories tend to appreciate, as opposed to materials, which almost always depreciate over time. Dr. Gilovich, I believe, from Cornell, actually has been studying this for a few decades, and the research did show that experiences, as fleeting as they tend to be, typically do deliver more lasting happiness than when compared to buying materials. However, I love to play the devil's advocate here. I think it's an important thing to bring up too, because there are some times where you can buy materials that provide you with continuous experiences over time. And that sort of muddies the water a little bit, because now you're buying a material thing, but that thing, say it's a Porsche 911, that stick that you get to drive around a windy road every other weekend, and you love driving the car. Well, technically, you bought a material that most people would see as flashy, obscene, or unnecessary and extravagant. However, to you, it's a indefinite experience that you get to continue enjoying on a regular basis. I think having that conversation with a spouse or a partner, however, also with yourself, about what does truly provide you with prolonged periods of satisfaction, as opposed to potentially small dopamine hits that are fleeting. I think that's a really important thing, because some of the quote unquote things that people provide them happiness, that really just provide them that sort of rush, or things like that latest iPhone, the designer clothing. However, I don't want to put those things down. They do provide some people with a lot of appreciation and happiness. So it's a difficult conversation to have, not only with your spouse, but with yourself as well. Personally, I tend to be more of an experience thing, but that doesn't mean I don't occasionally buy a nice golf club that provides me with multiple lackluster experiences when I hit it poorly.
Sure, you're certainly invested in golf. I know, for example, that's an important hobby to you, and I'm sure it requires, a certain amount of financial investment in addition to your time, but it's so important to you that it's absolutely worth it from what I can see. You're always happiest when you're talking about whatever golfing you did this weekend when you come in on Mondays.
It's definitely not a cheap hobby by any sense of the means. However, when I think about it, let's say I'll throw out a number. Let's say I spend $1,000 on golf a year. It's like, cool. Would I rather have that money in an IRA or a brokerage? No, not really. I love spending money on golf, and I don't know if you'd consider that a material or an experience, or maybe a mixture of both. However, lucky enough, early in my life, I found out that provides me with a lot of happiness, a lot of stress and angst as well. However, it comes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's great for you. And I think it's important to note that you've had that conversation with yourself. We've been talking a lot about spouses and households and how to have that conversation with another person. But I think it's equally as important for such as yourself. Right now, you're just a one-person household, and you've still taken the time to have that conversation with yourself. What do I want to spend my money on? Experiences versus things. Where do I stand? You have a good sense of self when it comes to that. So in the future, if you are part of a larger household, that conversation will be easier and much more natural to you because you've taken the time to build that foundation now as a young individual.
Yeah, and not everybody even has those things. They like to work, and they get home from work and they do stuff for a couple hours, and then they repeat day after day. So for some people, buying things is what they want to do, and I don't think either of us would sit here and say we are going to ask people never to want to buy things. However, I think just understanding that the long term, the prolonged periods of satisfaction tend to be more provided through experiences than things is a really valuable part of this conversation, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. It's fun to be a planner and hear that conversation if people ever have it in the meetings with us, kind of with each other in front of us. Or just in my personal life, there's someone I knew years ago, and they liked collecting this certain type of item. And to most people, they're like, well, you're spending a lot of money on like these little figurines or whatever they are. But they had so much fun seeking out these specific ones and looking for them and going to antique stores and whatever. Like they would go on road trips because they'd heard that this dealer somewhere had this, and they weren't expensive necessarily. It wasn't like a big thing, but they just loved buying and collecting this certain thing. It's like, yeah, they are buying a material possession. It's just stuff. But they were getting so much fun out of that it was an experience too. Like you said, the waters are muddied. It's whatever is important to you. I don't think you should be ashamed of it. I think you should recognize it and plan for that and communicate it to others if it's relevant. I think it's as simple as that, but kind of difficult to put into practice sometimes.
Yeah, I think a good final piece to leave that on is it's just checked versus unchecked materials. Like if you're spending your money on things intentionally, that you say, no, I buy myself a pocketbook every quarter because I did well this quarter and I like pocketbooks. That is completely fine. However, if you're one of these people who has a tough week and the only way you can cope with that is by going online and purchasing something, that's a completely different way of purchasing, and the intention is considerably different behind it. So I think just having that conversation and understanding that difference is important.
Sure. It's definitely something to think about. I think I'm going to end today with a slightly different question than usual. This morning, we both attended the State of the City downtown at the museum. Do you think this was a good use of your time? Did you learn anything important today?
No, it was pretty poor, honestly. No, that's a bad joke. That's what that is right there. I learned a lot. I think it was really, really well presented, and the people who presented, for those folks who weren't able to attend or maybe are not in the Longmont area, the folks who presented were extremely passionate and insightful about their respective topics, and it provided me with some respect for my local politics, which is not something I have a lot of experience with. A lot of people my generation are pushed to vote because the majority of voters tend to be older folks. and for good reason. It's a very important and unique privilege for folks in this country to be able to have a say in who their next representative is. And I think it's a great privilege us as Americans are bestowed with. However, a lot of people make this argument as a way to say, hey, Daniel, this is how you can make a difference by voting. But let's be honest, depending on what state you live in, some people's one vote will really not make that big of a difference. And I think today, looking at the local politics and the local plans for the community really shine my light on if people say they want to make a change, maybe the best way to do it is to get involved locally. I saw a commercial yesterday, someone talking about how nothing in their neighborhoods changed in the last couple of decades, and they were using this to complain about a specific political candidate. Cool. If you want to see your actual neighborhood and streets change, get involved in your local community and your local chamber and local politics, because they're the people who are going to have the most direct impact on the city and area you live in, and you'll probably realize a considerable greater impact and feel a presence more by getting involved locally versus nationally.
I think that's a good point, that it's, something that's easier to get involved with and then feel good about because you can see the impacts right there in your own neighborhood and learn a lot about it. I do hear a lot of people complain about not feeling like they're making an impact on like a national level, for example. But if you go to local things like this, you really can. It was a very interesting experience. So I'm glad you had a good time this morning.
Well, I don't think I can leave it there, Emily. Was there anything that you took away from the state of the city?
Oh, let's see. I mean, I enjoyed it as well. I liked learning about the projects that they're all working on and are pending. I like to be out and about in the community a lot. I don't spend nearly enough time in my apartment to justify paying rent on it, I feel like sometimes. But I like seeing everything from, we're building parks here, here, and here, and this is the facilities they're going to have, to maybe this train station that has been in the works forever. It feels like this is actually the expected date that it'll be finished. This is where it's going to be. This is what it's going to do for you. I get really excited about things like that, and I like talking to other people about them. So I like kind of seeing the timeline of projects, and things like State of the City this morning is a good way to keep up to date on all of them. So I would encourage people to attend as well. I love things like that in our community.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.